if you're like most people, you probably use Twitter, Facebook, Google+, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, and like all of the other social networks out there. I mean, it's crazy how many social networks have been created in the past 10 years. I mean, 10 years ago, social media was just one of those random fad-looking type of things where it was something that was going to be adopted by a few people. I mean, no one had any idea where social media was really going to head, and then it just became huge. Many people created social networks on as many accounts as they could to interact with a whole bunch of people. And that is the story of social media's growth. But since we have used all of these social networks and created accounts for them, our time has been spread very thin. Just because you are using 10 social networks doesn't mean you're better than the person who has 15 social networks, or the person who has 5 social networks, or the person who only uses 1 social network. In reality, the number of social networks we use does not matter. But the way we use our time on those social networks is what actually matters. Our productivity as we use these social networks matters. So, how many social networks should you be using so that you can be productive, you can be successful on them, and you can spread your message through the marketing on your social networks? Before I reveal the answer, I'm going to use a simple analogy to help you understand why it is better to use fewer social networks than it is to use a whole bunch of social networks. And that analogy is learning languages. Now, if you have to learn a new language from scratch, there's a huge learning process. You have to learn how to pronounce the words. You have to learn how to spell them. You have to learn where the accents go. And in Chinese and Japanese, you have to learn different symbols. And they're like tiny nuances that could be the difference of entire words and phrases. So there are plenty of things to learn about in every single language, and that's the same with social media. I mean, let's go back to languages for a second. If you wanted to learn as many languages as you could, so let's say English, Spanish, French, German, Italian, Portuguese, Russian, Chinese, and Japanese, would you take all of those languages at the same exact time? So you're learning all of the languages you see right in front of you on the screen at the same exact time. So either doing your Spanish conjugations, you're writing the definitions of other words in French, while speaking to someone in Chinese and reading Russian books. I mean, I don't know how anyone will be able to do all of that at the same time. You gotta have one of those like super genius brains where like 100% of your brain power is being used. But what you do instead is you would approach it one language at a time. And that's how many people become bilingual and trilingual. Well, social media is the same thing. Instead of focusing on Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, YouTube, Instagram, Vine, and LinkedIn, and a whole bunch of other ones, you need to take it one at a time. It is better to master one social network than it is to be mediocre at 10. Just in the same way that it is better to master one language than be mediocre at 10 and not know all the full basic information about those languages. So focus on one social network and just go one at a time. So when I approached myself to make this choice, I decided to focus most of my time on Twitter. That is why Twitter is by far my largest audience, where I have a little over 200,000 followers on all of the accounts that I operate on Twitter. So that became the first social network I focused on, and then I quickly mastered it. After I mastered Twitter, I went on to Pinterest, which has now led me to YouTube, and now I use a bunch of the other social networks because once you master one social network, it is a lot easier to master the other social networks. Think of the Romance languages. The Romance languages have many similarities. I mean, their conjugations are practically the same as some of the words. You could say one word in Spanish and it means the same exact thing in Italian. I mean, that's how these Romance languages work. So once you master one Romance language, it is easier for you to master all of the others. And that is the same concept that can be applied to social media. Now, you probably have all of these accounts: Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Google+. But something very important to note is that you are not going to delete the accounts that you choose not to be active on. So let's say you choose YouTube to be the one social network that you strive to master. You wouldn't delete your Twitter account, your Facebook account, your Pinterest account. You would definitely be less active on them. You would dramatically reduce the amount of time you spend on each of those social networks, but you would not delete them because they are going to grow even without your involvement. Even if you're only gaining 5 followers, which may not necessarily be life-changing, you have the audience that you have already built, and there's no reason to delete any of your social networks unless you are not proud of the content that you have posted on them. So just choose one social network, master it, then go back to another social network that you use, master that, and then repeat the process and continue to master other social networks. So you may be wondering at this point, when to expand? Now, I did mention earlier that once you master one, take another one seriously, and then it gets easier to master the social networks as you go. But one thing important to note is that you're only able to take as many social networks seriously as time allows, because you still need time to create products, write blog posts, organize the content for your social networks that you take seriously, and use them to amplify your message. So if you find that taking all of these social networks seriously takes up too much of your time and spreads it thin, don't take another social network seriously quite yet until you are able to find a tool that allows you to save an enormous amount of time, or until you find a reason to take one social network seriously but one not as seriously. So once you find yourself in a time crunch, find a way out of that time crunch before you take another social network seriously and invest all the time necessary to master it. That is all for this lecture. I hope it has served you, and what I want you to do is to dream big, achieve greatness, and unlock your potential today.